Hi, I'm BJ.
My name is Andres Larios Brown.
My name is Jillian Orr.
Hi, I'm Chris.
My name's Sky, my pronouns are he, him, and I am a Sephardic Jew.
I use the pronouns they, them, he, him, and ella if we're speaking Spanish.
My pronouns are she or hers.
I use they, them pronouns.
My pronouns are she, her. And I love a good ice cream sandwich.
Been around for a while? Yeah, that's me.
Growing up, I was taught that it was one of the worst things in the world to be gay, or to be bi, or to be queer of any form. That it was something, a weakness that we gave into, some temptation that we could have prevented but then gave in.
So I didn't hear a whole lot about queer people growing up in my religion, but my parents were friends with a lot of queer people.
From my religious background, people's sexuality and orientation were non-existent. You were straight and that was nothing else. And along with gender, besides people thinking that it was just male and female, I was taught nothing different.
I grew up in Orem in the 50s and 60s, Orem, Utah, and it was a little Happy Valley town of not very many people. And honestly, by the time I graduated high school, I'd never met anyone who was gay or queer. So it just was not an issue. It was not something that was even on my radar growing up.
I didn't have an understanding of queerness. I think principally because of my religion of origin, wasn't really talked about. And if it was talked about in kind of hushed tones or talked around, not necessarily talked at. And so I think there was a big mystery, a big question mark as to what queerness even was, what it would mean.
When I first realized my sexual orientation, I was very young, and it definitely conflicted with religious beliefs that were around me, and I felt weird openly expressing about it because I'd never heard anything bad about it before. I hadn't heard anything about it before. So opening up about that was definitely trying.
Having this understanding of how awful of a thing it would be to be queer, to be gay, or to be bi was suffocating when I started to recognize things about myself. It was as if you were to take a big beach ball and shove it underwater, and the more you shoved it under, the more pressure to just explode came up. And that's how it felt, was starting to identify and see these signs that I just had to hide. I was like, I can't even think about that. I can't even pay attention, because it was so terrifying to think that I could be something so terrible that I viewed as, that I was taught to view as being evil or awful. And so it was terrifying to try and to start to recognize these things.
Although I didn't get caught up in a lot of the rhetoric that the church was saying during a lot of my life from an early age somewhere, and I don't know where this came from, but I really felt a lot of shame for who I was. And it took a long time to figure out who I was. But shame and guilt and self-loathing and absolute fear of being found out were constant companions. So
it gave me a lot of cognitive dissonance to hear what my religious background was telling me, and then also going through my own self-discovery of, starting off, I think I'm gay, I think I'm non-binary, I think I'm polyamorous, and then having this background towards me saying that you can't be because you're not allowed to be. And it just caused me struggles for so many years, and it was hard hearing that.
One of the big impacts is without a real framework of some of these characteristics that I was noticing, some of the things that I recognized were different. I think the only thing I could do was put it into a category of bad, or a category of weird or wrong or shameful. And so I think, because I think oftentimes we have a recognition early on about certain things, certain desires, wants, what I'm drawn to, what interests me, what excites me. But because I didn't really have a framework other than the framework that was given to me, heteronormativity, cisnormativity, I think there was a lot of fear about the things that now I would categorize as queer. So yeah, I think that's the lasting impact, is still trying to unattach those things that are different that different doesn't necessarily have to be bad or wrong or something to be hidden or avoided.
My earliest memory of identifying of these emotions that I had was when I was a kid. And I had a dream that I actually was engaged to Reese Witherspoon. And I woke up and I had these feelings, and I actually wrote in my journal. I need to go find it. I wrote in my journal, it was almost like my prayer to God, and I was like, I will never have these feelings for a woman. I am so sorry. This will never happen again. But the feeling that I had of having an attraction to a woman was so like exciting, but because I felt that, I felt so much shame because I wasn't supposed to feel that. And so that was my earliest memory. And then, things, you start noticing and identifying things as you get older, going through your teenage years. But it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I met someone and had feelings for them. I had stronger feelings for it. And so I remember praying and saying, help me stop these. Help me stay away from this. Help me, push this away. Help me suffocate this feeling. And I kept battling with myself, really, and thinking I was battling with God, but I wasn't. I was battling with myself. And I remember one morning, I drove up into the mountains and I started writing it out, how I felt. And then I in turn started writing what I felt God would have said to me if he were sitting in front of me. And I wrote down, my feelings are a gift. And how I feel about people and my sexuality is a gift. And that changed everything for me, because it went from a poison and a plague to a gift and to something beautiful for me. And once I got that, it just shifted, and I was like, okay, this is what it is. I'm moving forward with this. I'm letting go of what I was taught, and I'm moving forward with what I know is true, because it felt right to me.
I won't sugarcoat it. I was angry for a long time. And some point, I just got tired of being angry all the time.
Up until the time I came out, I was so ashamed of who I was, I never even talked to God. I'd never prayed about this. So in one way, I think it was really good. I didn't spend years of my life trying to pray this away. I think that might have been my undoing, as I know that wouldn't have been taken away from me and probably would have destroyed me.
I actually had a dream when I was in school, like in Utah, for residential treatment, and I had a dream that like God came to me and said that I would make a good man of God, and I can reach people with my avenues. So that was pretty cool. Don't really know what he meant, still don't know what he meant. I don't think it's to be a rabbi, but maybe I will be one day, who knows.
Prayer started to become damaging for me. Prayer started to become, because of my perception of what God was and my perception of how he saw me, prayer then suffocated me even more in something that needed to be healed.
I think for me, uncoupling spirituality and religion has been a really helpful thing for me. I think growing up, I was told that those are one and the same, that my spiritual self is also my religious self. And the way that I'm a spiritual self is by adhering to all the rules and the expectations of my religion. And so I think early on, because there wasn't really space for me in the theology of my religion, or at least the theology that was given to me or taught to me, I think for a while I kind of threw everything out. There was a real strong pendulum swinging as far as like mysticism or magic or the things that we can't explain was all something that I didn't want. I wanted to disconnect, and I only wanted the tangible because I feel like the unknown was used against me. It was something that was positioned as something that I shouldn't want. I think the religion that I grew up with had a real strong emphasis on faith, but also a real strong emphasis on knowing. There was a lot of conversations about, I know this to be true. I know this, concepts of testimony. And so I feel like what I've been able to do is to really feel comfortable in not knowing, comfortable in kind of what I would deem as faith.
I honestly think that God kind of took away all that guilt and shame and self-loathing and homophobia and transphobia. and helped me to learn to love myself and who I was. And eventually, not only did I learn to love myself, but I've come to see this as a blessing in my life. I wouldn't go back and change it. As hard as it's been to get to this point, I wouldn't go back. I like who I am, what's going on in my life, and I love being able to help other people, and it's a great space to be in. Well, in the early days, it was especially going to church when I first started dressing, especially when I started wearing dresses and skirts. I would often pull out the music and play Bonnie Raitt's "Let's Give Them Something to Talk About" to get myself a little motivated. Let's go put it out there. Let's give them something to talk about.
I don't feel like I left. I feel like I got pushed out, which is also a really difficult experience. When my husband and I got engaged, it was right around the same time that then our religious leader got in contact with us and wanted to have a conversation about our options. And at that point, our options were either we leave by our own accord, or essentially we'd be told to leave. And so me being the strong, empowered human that I am was like, people don't kick me out, right? I leave. And to this day, actually, we have a box of our religious books, things from our missions, things that had a lot of spiritual meaning. And on top of that is our letter that says that we are no longer a part of this community. And so I think that still stings, that's still hard. I wonder what my trajectory would have been if that had not been so tightly adhered to. That idea that my queerness, I had to choose between my queerness or my religious community.
The biggest pushback came from people from my mission. I recently graduated BYU, and so once I graduated, I was able to come out because if I was at BYU in a relationship, I would be kicked out and my degree would be taken from me. And so I was recently this year able to come out, and I had people from my mission that were telling me how disappointed my mom must be in me and how heartbroken my family must be because I don't have this eternal glory and I can't have all of these things that everybody else gets to have that I don't. And it was painful to hear and to experience, because I feel that since I've been able to embrace my identity, I feel more compassion and love for people than I did before when I was in a religious institution. And so to experience those who are supposed to exemplify those things, that how they did the opposite, was eye-opening for me.
Coming out, that's fun. Especially as trans, it's something, especially as you start to change, you can't hide, so it requires a lot of coming out. So every coming out seemed to be like I was on trial. There would be I would tell my side of the story, and at the end of it, there would be a judgment, whether someone still wanted to be a part of my life or not. It was a little rocky with my kids. Two of them were gung-ho accepting me, and two were not so much. Then friends were really pretty awesome. Then my wife's family, that was kind of interesting. We're still getting there with, I think with some of them. People have been really good allies. I can tell there's some that really don't want anything to do with me, and that's okay. At least they're not being rude and doing anything that would be negative.
When I came out, I was received relatively weirdly by my community because someone tried to out me. So that was not fun, and I think people always knew about me because I was definitely not hiding my disdain for dresses and all that stuff, you know? Like, I always felt uncomfortable in traditional cis female spaces, or just female spaces in general, and my ethnic community was like, what are you doing? No, kind of a little bit, but like my parents like were really supportive, and people realized that like, hey, the Malamids are accepting their son, we can accept ours. It's not that big of a deal. So in some ways I was a trendsetter or a anomaly in the Persian Jewish community, because I was the first to really come out to my family, because I come from a very well-known family in the Jewish Persian community. So it was even more doubled before my grandmother passed. May she rest in peace. And she told me she was proud of me and that she loved me. And she and my grandfather, paternal grandfather, both really loved me, not in spite of my queerness, but because of it. They loved me for who I was and who I am. And that was a really cool experience to have.
It was definitely stuck between me being distanced, mostly on my part, and people being accepting. It was hard for people that knew me since I was born to really think about me in this new way, because they've known me for more than my life, because they knew my parents beforehand, and they just always had this idea of me. Same did my parents, and this new aspect of me coming out just kind of came out of left field for everybody. And there are some people that I just don't talk to anymore. There's some that I talk to more because of it, but well, that's just kind of how life goes when you're coming out. You lose people, you gain people, and so it's pretty much all for the better.
It's been a while. I came out when I was 24, and so it's been like 8 years since all of that went down. And it's interesting, as you asked the question, I noticed there's still some emotion, which makes sense, right? It was a really hard time. I was not super embraced or celebrated by my community. Yeah, in fact, kind of the opposite. I feel like during the time of self-discovery and real self-celebration, there was a lot of mourning that was happening. So I think that that's a really interesting thing for us as queer humans, is kind of the way that the world is kind of structured right now. Celebration of self is also met with a real loss. We're told that we can't have both and we can't hold both. And it's not for our own doing, right? I think we're incredibly creative people, and so I know that I had figured out how I would all fit. I had figured out in my religion of origin and in my community how I could actually have a really beautiful place, but it's these external sources, right? These sources of wisdom, the outsourcing of it, that told me, you can't do that, it doesn't fit, it has to be this way. And so I think as I chose myself over dogma, can I say that? I lost a lot of community.
I left my previous religion when I was around 14, and since then I've just been on a self-discovery mission. I became Buddhist for a while. I learned about being spiritual and not religious, because those things can exist outside of religion, and I just found more beauty in the simple things around me than constantly trying to appease something bigger than me. And that went great and hand in hand with my sexuality and my gender orientation, because I was able to discover those things about me without having to worry if someone would be unpleased by these aspects of me.
When I think of spirituality, for me, spirituality and humanity are intertwined. I think there's the divine in the human and vice versa. And so I think I am endlessly and ongoingly moved by how miraculous life is.
Since I've come out, I've really become a lot more nuanced. A lot of things just really don't work for me anymore. There have been restrictions placed upon me. I'm no longer allowed to be in the temple. I probably will never hold another calling in the church. So it's My testimony has changed. I joke that it's kind of in a complete remodel. Everything's off the walls. Some of the walls are down. They're in a pile on the floor. And I'm just kind of hanging on at this point. I know God has wanted me to be in the church and be visible, but I think we both know that I can't do that forever.
I was able to embrace my queerness through my spirituality, actually. Since I was young, I have a very strong connection with God and getting answers and getting guidance and receiving and having a strong relationship that when something no longer fit the way that I was taught was supposed to fit, I had to tap into that higher power to be able to see myself as I am, to be able to see it and be like, this is what I am, God. This is what people are saying you feel about this, but you tell me how you feel about this. And it changed for me, and that's when I started to understand God, and I understood people and humanity and compassion and love in a different level than the way that I was ever taught.
I feel like I'm more spiritual but also religious in a way that I follow my Jewish traditions because I don't want to lose them. I feel like I'm more of a secular Jew, but I do believe in God. I do want to believe in God, I think is the distinction. I do believe in God most of the time, I think, or not sometimes, but I don't know. I would like to believe there is a God. Do I? Maybe, maybe not sure yet. But my Judaism is not dependent on the fact that there is a God. My religion is dependent on the fact that I come from a long line of really resilient people.
My husband and I talk a lot about what our spiritual practices look like now. What are our rituals, right? Because I was raised in an environment where there were lots of practices, there were lots of rituals, there were lots of ceremony. And I feel like I come from a long line of pioneer stock, as we would say, at least on my mom's side. And so trying to discover what could that look like. And I think for me, one of my spiritual practices is actually like going to queer spaces, like going out dancing, being community with other queer humans that are celebrating ourselves, which I feel like is also a really interesting shift from what I was raised with, which is like quietness, more seriousness, is spiritual practice. And so I think it's also interesting to be loud as a spiritual practice, to be celebratory, to have glitter be actually a religious act.
With spirituality, it is about relationships. And it is about finding your knowing and finding your truth and doing it. And so that's where I shifted from a religious aspect of doing what I was told to do, to shifting to spirituality, to doing what I feel is right that I should do.
Some practices in Judaism that really strengthen me as a queer person, not just as a queer person, but as a whole person, I think are the 10 Commandments. I try to live my life by those. Tikkun olam, which is like to do good. I really love serving others and serving my community and the queer community. And also in Judaism, I really love serving other people and like helping out.
I identify as a lot of different things. Spiritually, I am a Buddhist and I follow their ideologies. I'm also an atheist, and I'm queer, non-binary, polyamorous, and a person of color. All these aspects of me are what make, well, Chris.
There absolutely should be room for queer people in the church. As I've been on this journey in the last 5 years, I have come to know the most amazing, incredible people I've ever met in my life, both in the LGBTQ community, but also parents and allies as well. These are people who continue to be marginalized, continue to be beat up, and pushed towards the edges and pushed out of the pews and not being welcomed. And the church, society, everywhere is so much better off with LGBTQ people in it. And how do we change it? I don't know, other than it's got to be kind of a grassroots movement. I think, first off, queer people need to change the dynamics. We need to stand up for ourselves. We need to change the narrative, speak out when we can in kind ways, which is hard to do a lot of times when you're being persecuted. But yeah, we just need to keep winning people over. And as we tell stories and share our experiences, I think people's hearts and minds begin to change, and people can see us as not something horrible, but it's wonderful people that we are.
So there's definitely room for queer people in Judaism, especially Reform and Reconstructionist Judaism. I don't know about all the spaces, but I was also involved in the Interfaith Council at UVU, and that was a really cool experience for me as a secular Sephardic Jew, secular-ish Sephardic Jew. And I think in religious spaces where we all congregate together as different religions, there's a lot of room for queer people because we are all beautiful and unique in the way that we are and the way we believe things. And it was a really cool experience serving on that Interfaith Council. I learned a lot about myself, about others, about other religions. And I think what can be done for us queer people to make us feel more welcome and included is having representation from the Bima, which is like the altar, I guess, whatever, in Judaism, and to love each other, you know, like love thy neighbor, you know, like that doesn't just come from the New Testament, it comes from the Old Testament. Love thy neighbor as you would thyself.
From my experience, a lot of big religious communities have not been accepting or inviting to queer people in just any general sense. And I feel bad because I know a lot of queer people that want to identify with that religion, but they just can't because it goes against their religion's doctrine.
I used to think that I could be the bridge. I used to think that I could be the bridge between religion and queer, or spirituality and queer. And I realized that as long as there are rules and regulations as to who a person should be or how they should be, I don't think there can be a bridge. I don't think that that those two worlds can cohabitate and that they can be one. And so
I feel like a lot of people don't think that spirituality and sexuality or gender orientation don't go hand in hand, but I personally think that they go directly hand in hand. Because who would you be without all these different aspects about yourself? You should definitely be able to express every part of you. Sexuality, gender orientation, spirituality, religious values, that should be your choice to express. And as long as it doesn't hinder anyone else, then it's beautiful in any way that it can be.
I think the best way to allow people to navigate their life and be like, figure out what they want to do, to be spiritual, to be queer, to unify both, is to understand that we were someplace before that we are not now. That we used to be something that we don't necessarily agree with anymore, right? That I used to tell people that we knew a group of people were going to be destroyed once they embraced homosexuality. I remember saying that. I remember sitting in a bus with some of my friends saying that when a community accepts homosexuality, that is when they are destroyed. And there's all this evidence in the Bible. And for me to sit here and understand, to remember, for me to remember what I was before is not who I am now, gives me compassion for other people in their journey and in their processes that I probably in 10 years from now will even change from what I am now. Is that's how we hold space for one another, is remembering that we no longer think the way that we used to, and that people can think what they want now, and that may change for them, or what they thought before isn't what they think now, and then that's all okay.
I think families can really help their queer children by giving them a space to question their faith and come back around to it, or maybe not. I think my parents were really good at not making me do certain things just because it was expected of them.
I was very lucky because my family, my sibling, I'm fifth of 7 kids. You know, you think that's a lot, but like we're like practically the Brady Bunch. Anyways, I'm fifth of 7 kids, and my older sibling already came out as gay, and that was a huge transition. Then I had older siblings and sisters that had left the church, and so by the time that I started to recognize things about myself, my family was very loving, and they were very understanding and supportive. There's some challenges here and there, but for the most part, I had a lot of support in my home, which I was very lucky.
I had a supportive family that loved me no matter what. but they were still very tied to that religion, and kind of backing away from it took time for them and for me because it was such a big part of my life. But they learned to love me, and more importantly, I learned to love myself in all aspects of it.
Sometimes I think parents are put in such a difficult bind. I think we as queer humans understand that bind, and I think our parents are navigating that alongside us, right? Of this like love of self, love of family, love of connection, and this love of religion, community, theology, understanding the divine plan. Because I think sometimes we talk about love as being the answer, and I think love is a great place to start. And I think the enactment of love is actually where the rubber meets the road and where it actually becomes really difficult and complex.
I think the most painful thing that families can do when they have family members that identify differently is when they ask them to be different or present different in front of their family. Is they ask them to not say certain things, or they ask them to not tell their family that they are or aren't something, or they ask them and their significant other to not look like significant others. And I think that is the most painful, is because you're asking them to not be themselves around what should be the most safe environment.
This is something that I kind of wish I had. It was the idea that I wish parents understood that what spirituality and religion was best for them is sometimes not always best for their kids. For any parents out there, this is just coming from my opinion, you have to be open to telling them everything, every good and ugly part about every religion, yours included. This is how we open and grow as people. This is how we learn how to decide what we want through life. You can't block any negativity that's being criticized about any religion, including your own. This has to be an open conversation. And if you can't handle that, then what? Do you really follow your religious values to a T then? If you can't be completely honest to your own kids about every aspect of your own spirituality?
I feel like maybe one of the things would be trust. I think trusting that capacity to care for and know your young human is a really important thing. I think sometimes parents can really doubt themselves and trust kind of that intuition. I think there's a lot of expectations put on parents and a lot of burden put on parents to be able to have it all figured out. And so I wonder if there can also be an ease and a breath for parents. I think as I interact with a lot of parents, sometimes the most helpful thing is just being able to take a breath and saying that we kind of have a soft place to land, that we're practicing new things, we're doing new things, and we're not going to get it right at the very beginning. And so if we can breathe and allow our full brain to be on like open and engaged rather than kind of in a fear kind of brain energy, I wonder if that would allow us then to do that creation a little bit better.
One memory I have was when my mom asked me if I was going to date other girls when I broke up with my last girlfriend. And that was the coolest thing for me, because I was like, wow. She could have said, are you gonna date again? Are you gonna date another boy? Are you gonna date this or that? Because being bisexual, you know, it could be either one, but she asked me, are you gonna date another girl after this? And it was just, that was very validating and accepting to me. You know, is asking, when family members ask about your life and ask about these things, you know, my aunt, I'm sorry. Just before my aunt died a week ago, she asked me if my girlfriend and I had plans to have a family. And no one's ever asked us that. No one's ever asked my girlfriend and I if we plan to have a family, or if we plan to, what our wedding plans would be or would look like. And my aunt, right before she died, asked that. And it meant the world to me. And so I think for family members to ask about the things that we care the most about, whether they agree or not, but to ask and to show interest in something that deeply matters to us means the most.
I think sometimes when we come out, there's this expectation that we know everything about ourselves, and that we know everything about queerness, and we know everything about everything. And so I think that grace and that patience with ourselves, that I've been really harmed, I've been wounded, and so it's gonna take some time for me to heal, and that's okay. Some of my first relationships and my first interactions were not the most authentic me. I was coming from a wounded place, and so I said things and did things and acted in a way that was the best that I could do at the time. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've learned some. And so maybe just grace and patience for the process, and not feeling like I need to arrive at a destination. Yeah, I think identity is not an arrival, it's that process and that practice maybe. And I think that's maybe the most spiritual thing we can do, right? Is to get to know ourselves, to understand how the still small voice or our intuition or our wisdom or our gut speaks to us. Maybe that's what I would say.
I think the first thing I had to realize was I didn't need everybody's acceptance and permission. And so I think those who are trying to navigate spirituality and queerness and all of that is to realize I don't need everyone else's permission to be queer or to be spiritual. And so when navigating spirituality and when navigating queerness, I think the first thing we do is set aside all the opinions and thoughts that are coming into our head. Set aside everyone else's opinions. Then set aside the rules and regulations that don't fit or don't coexist. And the very most important thing is to tap into your knowing. Tap into yourself, what feels right. Tap into God, what sounds right, what feels correct for me and my life and what I am navigating right now. Because I can't get answers for everybody else in this world, but I know that I can get guidance for myself. So the first step is let go of everyone's opinions and thoughts. Second is let go of all the rules and regulations that community and that cultures create. And then the third is connect with God. Connect with your spirituality, connect with your knowing.
When I left my religion, I was kind of lost between the community that I had that was very supporting, that I distanced myself from because of what they were propagating, and then trying to find a new identity and a new community to help me out. I found it through a lot of my own interests that I was able to express, as in I was able to find community through me being queer. I was able to find a great queer community around me. That's where I found Encircle. That's where I found my local GSA and support groups. That's where I was able to find a lot of my lifelong friends. And I was able to find them through my own hobbies of dance. And I found a lot of people through that too. It all just depends on your own interests and if you're willing to really kind of come out of your shell and actually express what you want, and you'll find people everywhere that most likely want the same things.
First off, learn all that you can. Second off, learn how to tell your story. Learn how to share what you're going through. That'll become vitally important, especially as you come out to parents and other people. Again, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to be on trial. So you need to be able to tell and explain your experience. And that's really hard, I know. It took me a long time to figure it out, and I know you're struggling, but try to find the words, try to find the ways to say it that makes the most sense. And before you come out, make sure, do your best to try and figure out a way if you'll be safe. Most importantly, be safe. And And as you come out, just be brave, be who you are, be fearless in living your best life, and move forward knowing that you can have an awesome future and you can do whatever you want. Will things be hard? Sure. Life is hard anyway, but you can do it, and you can have an awesome life, and you can be happy. And we need you. We need you to be here. And don't give up on us. Let us help.
I would definitely tell young queer people who have competing or differentiating identities that don't necessarily go well together, that they don't think go well together. Actually, let's highlight that comparison. I would encourage them to do their own research, find people in their own communities. Like I found Jewish people who were also queer online and realized I wasn't alone. And I think that's a really important thing for us, all people in general, but especially queer people, to find a community and stick to it and understand that there's more that unites us than divides us, but sometimes you need your own people to help you out with something.
You know, I think what came up for me is this real solidarity and community. I think there's something that binds us as queer humans to one another, and that is often rejection. At least in this iteration of human history, right, is we have familiarity with that rejection, that familiarity with being told, I think, our biggest fear as human beings, which is that we're unwanted as we are. And so I think, first and foremost, finding community maybe is we already have that community. My queerness has existed longer than I've existed, right? I think it's this intergenerational thing. And so knowing that I come from a long lineage of queer humans from all different cultures and all different demographic and physical locations. And so, yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the deeper I get to know my queerness, the more connected to the larger queer community I am. Yeah, which I think has been my theme this entire time, right? Like the introspective work, the understanding of self inherently is expansive. It doesn't reduce us, it actually increases our capacity to understand the world at large. I also feel like one of the things that's really important is to recognize that it's never a need for us to be in communities, relationships, environments that make us feel small. I think sometimes we put up with a lot as queer humans, and we're told that that's kind of just our lot in life, that that's what we're supposed to do, that in order to maintain meaningful relationships, we have to reduce ourselves or be less of ourselves. And so I think I want to put some energy towards that shouldn't be a prerequisite for connection. That's an unfair position to put us in, that I have to be smaller or less or more quiet or less queer in order to maintain relationships. So maybe, yeah, it's okay to be us, and it's okay to be us in our fullness, and it's okay if people aren't in a position to receive that in its fullness, but it's not our fault. It's not that we need to be less. It's that they still have work to do.
I can't say anything profound that probably no one's ever heard before, but when it comes to your religious faith and your sexual orientation and gender identity, it's all part of you. You're all one big whole. And if you're denying one part of you in either direction, you're ending up hurting yourself in many ways. But if you can take time to really explore yourself in all those aspects, it's all going to be worth it in the end. And that was at least my experience, and I hope that it can be yours too.
I think just my final thoughts would be to be tolerant of others. Just because they don't subscribe to the same beliefs as you does not mean that you can't understand them or empathize with them. I think there's always something you can get from somebody else. You don't have to be Jewish, you don't have to be any other religion, you don't have to be atheist to understand an atheist. There's things we can find in other people that are beautiful regardless of their religion, spiritual identity, gender identity, or sexual orientation, you know? Like there's beauty in everyone.
There was a thought. I actually just had a breakfast with my brother, and I don't know, let's see if this even comes out, because we were talking and I asked him, I asked him, how does someone who is queer still get the support of the religion? And then he said, well, let's take a step back. Do we have to have that support? Do we have to have that validation? And as we shift and as our beliefs shift, we start to find community, and that's just how life is. We find community and we find support in different areas. And so I think we need to let go of the expectation of what we receive from other people. And our spirituality doesn't come from other people. Our spirituality doesn't come from locations. It doesn't come from all the words of that other people are saying. It really comes from us seeking it. Spirituality comes from us seeking it and us trying to navigate our lives in alignment with that.